And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Greetings, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan, now with your marine weather outlook for Sunday into Monday across the state of Alaska. First off, sea ice. We are at a minimum extent of the ice. Waters are open along the Chukchi Sea and the Arctic coast. We don't expect new ice to really be forming until at some point late September into the early portion of October. Minimum will likely occur very soon, coming up perhaps here in the next week or so. Later tonight into early Sunday morning, we have a rather strong low down near 970 millibars that'll be moving up into the central Gulf and the frontal system around it. We'll have gale to even some storm force winds, especially the open waters off of the northeastern Gulf coastline, as well as the western areas of the Gulf, especially there at the entrance of Cook Inlet in between Kodiak Island and the southern portion of the Kenai Peninsula. By Sunday afternoon, the low will begin to fill, rising up to 982 millibars. Continue to see low pressure, just weaker low pressure troughs lag back across, especially the Brooks Range into areas of the northwest. Here's another little low coming out of the North Pacific, south of the eastern Aleutian Sunday afternoon. And by the time we get into Monday, that low will deepen a little further and be located back up in the central Gulf, assuming a similar position to the current low that'll be impacting that area. And then another low moving from off the Kamchatka coast and western Bering Sea will move into the central Bering by Monday afternoon. So winds rather brisk out here across the Panhandle. We expect 35-knot gales, gusts as high as 45 knots from the south-southeast there in through Lynn Canal. For the outer coast, strongest winds will be from Sitka westward of Gustavus. We're looking at 30 to 40 knot southeast to easterly gales and waves around it in excess of 20 to 24 feet. Winds will be more northeasterly out of Yakutat Bay at 25 knots with waves there offshore in the nearshore waters within 15 nautical miles of shore as high as 18, 19 feet. Wind and waves will begin to come down Monday. Look for south-southeast winds 15 to as high as 25 knots here down through Dixon Entrance. Waves as high as 5 feet, 3 feet up and through Lynn Canal. And then for the outer coast, southwest winds to 25 knots off of Craig and south of Sitka, waves 18, 19 feet. South winds to 20 knots west of Sitka, Gustavus, and south of Yakutat with waves 12 to as high as 17 feet. Now across the northwestern Gulf, strongest winds will be coming out of lower Cook Inlet. We expect winds out of the northwest of 50 knots with waves as high as 14 to 15 feet. Offshore the Kenai, northwest winds 30 knots, and within Prince William Sound, westerly winds to 30 knots and waves 7 feet. Upper Cook Inlet, lighter winds once you get up toward Turnagain Arm, Canet Arm, northwest winds 10 knots, waves running a few feet there. For Monday, wind and waves will be coming down across the region. Variable winds around 10 knots off the Kenai, waves 6 feet. Southeast winds 10 knots, 2-foot waves within Prince William Sound. Variable winds 10 knots, couple-foot waves upper third of Cook Inlet. And then still westerly winds, though not as strong, 25 to 30 knots and waves running 6 to 7 feet. Across Kodiak Island on Sunday, look for 35 to 40 knot westerly gales with some gusts as high as 55 knots in Shelikof Strait with waves of 10 to as high as 13 feet there east of Kodiak Island. Winds northwest to west falling off from 25 to 35 knots to around 20 knots as you get either side there of Sand Point, and then winds more variable to southeast at 15 knots as you get closer toward the eastern Aleutians. And waves generally running 4 to 5 feet here as you extend out along the Alaska Peninsula on the North Pacific, 6 to 7 feet on the Bering side, and within areas of Bristol Bay, especially north of Port Huyton, you could see waves as high as 8 feet with northwesterly winds at 25 knots. On Monday, winds will further come down across the region. Look for generally west-northwest winds 20 to 25 knots in the vicinity of Kodiak Island and east of Chignik. Waves 4 to 6 feet. For areas within Bristol Bay, 15-knot west winds, 4-foot waves, and winds turn back toward the south as you get down toward the end of the Alaska Peninsula. South winds to 20 knots with waves 6 feet there off south of False Paths in the North Pacific and 4 feet there north of Cold Bay. Across the Aleutians, eastern Aleutians will see southeast to east winds around 15 knots, waves 5-6 feet, and then they turn more toward the southwest at 20 to increasing to 30 to 35 knots once you get west of Adak, and waves across the western Aleutians will build to around 9 to as high as 12 feet. Then on Monday, southwest winds 20 to 25 knots, eastern and central Aleutians waves 6 to 8 feet on the North Pacific side, 4 to 7 feet on the Bering side, and then winds southwesterly shifting northwest 25 to 30 knots west of Kiska, with waves running generally 9 to 12 feet out across that area of the western Aleutians. On Sunday, we look for northwest winds 25 knots, 5-foot waves within Bristol Bay, west winds 15 knots, 4-foot waves within Kuskokwim Bay, south winds Pribilof Islands 15 knots, waves 5 feet as you get offshore there, and then generally westerly winds at 20 knots coming into the lower portion of the Yukon Delta and Norton Sound with waves 4 to 5 feet. For Monday, winds will come down across the southwest, west winds 15 knots, 2-foot waves within Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay, south winds 10 knots, waves 2 feet. Look for west winds 10 to 15 knots into Norton Sound, waves 3 to 4 feet, but then winds will try to turn more northeasterly off of Hooper Bay and easterly to 25 knots at St. Matthew, with waves as high as 8 feet as you get out towards St. Matthew. Around the north side of St. Lawrence Island, northwest winds 15 to 20 knots, including areas northwest of Nome, south of the Bering Strait, waves 4 to 5 feet. Lower Chukchi Sea, north to northwest winds 15 to 25 knots, waves 3 to 6 feet, highest there around Wales, Shishmaref. And then northeast winds take over, especially around and north of Point Hope and Cape Lisburn, going all the way through Utqiagvik and Kaktovik. We're looking at northeast winds 20 to 25 knots and waves 5 to 6 feet. Finally, on Monday, across the Arctic, winds turn more easterly 15 to 20 knots with waves 5 to 6 feet. Lower Chukchi Sea northeast winds turning westerly to 20 knots within Kotzebue Sound with waves of 4 to 6 feet. West winds into Wales and Port Clarence south of the Bering Strait on Monday at 20 knots with waves of 5 feet. And the north side of St. Lawrence Island, we're looking for north winds at 15 knots and waves running right around 4 feet.